Good evening, everybody. It's my privilege to welcome all of you to a two-day seminar on the Indian Parliament and Democratic Transformation. Dr. Karan Singh, Mr. Marwah, Lord Meghnad Desai, Dr. Florian Hartleb, Mr. Tomislav Delinich, Dr. Ajay Mehra, who is the moving force behind this. It is fortunate that we are partnering with the Center for Public Affairs and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation for this two-day seminar. IIC's preoccupation and engagement with the subject of governance has been very long, and as my predecessors have all been distinguished civil servants, the various aspects of this vast area have figured prominently in our programs. Some years ago, the IIC received a generous donation from the late Shri B.G. Deshmukh for an annual program on governance. We have been holding governance lectures by several distinguished persons, and last year for our Golden Jubilee celebrations, we organized a series of 9 talks on various issues such as electoral reforms, devolution in rural and urban development, the girl child, civil administrative reforms, India's future vis-à-vis the demographic dividend, governing diversity, economic reforms, and finally closing the series with the C.D. Deshmukh Memorial Lecture by Shri Gopal Gandhi on a jubilant India. It is therefore fitting that we do a seminar to mark the Diamond Jubilee of the Indian Parliament. Dr. Ajay Mehra has also helped us design our governance series, and he is as I said earlier, the moving force behind this seminar. As a concerned citizen and not a specialist in this field, I think Indian Parliament is perhaps at crossroads, which is, of course, you can say that for anything in India in the current times. Everything is at crossroads. But I was just looking through last year's some reports, and it said that in 1952, when the lower house was formed, the educational level was not as high as it is today. There is also perhaps a greater representation of women than earlier. I think at the beginning there were about 4 point something to 5%, and now we are almost 11%, but nowhere near countries like Sweden, Argentina, UK, and USA. USA actually seems to be the lowest among them all. Only about 17% is what the reports tell me. Well, I would have expected far more than that. What was interesting was that the average age of the parliament has increased rather than decreased, which was a little surprising. But of course, together with these good things, there are some public perceptions, which I think we talk about a lot. And one is the irregular functioning of the parliament and how it seems to be more at halt than actually working many days. And I was looking at, again, the statistics put out that in 1950s, there were 127 days of Lok Sabha and 93 days of Rajya Sabha, whereas now we have about, on an average, 73 days for both houses. In 2004, it was startling to find that only 18 bills were passed by the parliament, and there was very little discussion on those bills. And also very few, I think the last private member's bill was passed some 40 years ago. And so there is, again, very little discussion on these issues. The quality of debates has become a question mark, and maybe the televised proceedings have something to do with that. I don't know. People can see what is going on in the parliament, and maybe that leads to some posturing. I wouldn't hazard a guess on that. However, I will now hand it over to Dr. Karan Singh, who is chairing this evening's...
I didn't know that. I'm a sort of prominent chair of everything that happens.
Okay, I'm sorry. No, who is chairing? Mr. Marwah is chairing. Okay, sorry about that.
He's the guilty party.
Yeah.
Okay. But I will now ask Dr. Ajay Mehra to tell us a little more about the conference, about the seminar. Thank you.
No, I'm a permanent chair of everything that happens.
Honorable Dr. Karan Singh, Chief Guest for this occasion. Honorable Mr. Marwah. Honorable Lord Meghnad Desai. Dr. Florian Hartleb, keynote speakers for this inaugural event. Dr. Kavita Sharma, Director IIC. Mr. Tomislav Delinich, Acting Representative of KAS. Distinguished participants of this seminar, ladies and gentlemen. It is my privilege to welcome you on behalf of Center for Public Affairs, which is a modest network think tank focusing on public institutions, amongst other issues, for the inaugural event and the conference that would follow the next couple of days. I must express my thanks to Dr. Kavita Sharma, Director IIC, as without her initiative, this conference would not have taken off. We were keen to organize a conference on Indian Parliament in 2012. That was the Diamond Jubilee year. As a continuation of such an exercise, we did in 2002, again in cooperation with the India International Center and Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, on completion of 50 years. And we have a publication also on that, which is generally academically done quite well. On this one, Dr. Kavita Sharma sought us out, and we exchanged notes, and we decided that we will be, even though a year late, we will be holding this event and discussing various issues relating to Parliament. 60 years is in a way just another time-bound landmark that comes in natural progression. Why should we integrate the institution just because it has crossed this milestone? In my humble opinion, this intellectual examination is essential for 6 reasons. First, with critical generational change, the texture and political institutional culture of India's representative institution has been changing. It happened in 1967, I am talking of generational change, and the change in texture of the institution. It happened in 1967, 1977, 1989, 1999, and so on. Second, changes in India's party system and arrival of state parties with strong satraps and their families in command too has significantly impacted the institution. Third, corruption and criminalization. We have been talking about it more so since 1993 with the famous Vora Committee report, which has infused new element into politics of the country and in all the representative institutions, not merely in Parliament. This adds a new dimension to studying these institutions from various perspectives, more particularly from the perspective of representation, institutional culture, and accountability. Fourth, as the country's apex representative and legislative institution, Parliament provides deliberative space on various issues facing the polity and society. How is this deliberative space being used? Fifth, we are living in an era of media glare. Dr. Sharma just pointed out its impact on grandstanding by various parties and leaders functioning within its august precinct need an examination. Finally, in recent years, there has been considerable focus on legislative output in Parliament. Dr. Sharma just referred to it. How do we look at these what we call disruptions and several impact of this? There are various kinds of theorization on this. In our last exercise, Professor Balbir was sitting here, my teacher also. He thought that it is not merely stalling Parliament, but they really want to make an issue in a different way. But what is the impact? 10 years later, we probably need to revisit that issue because, on the one hand, we have that famous quotation from Lord Bryce, where he very famously says that every time we look back at these institutions, we think that previous ones were doing better. And on the other, we have from John Stuart Mill, where he says that these institutions are what we make of them. So, James Stuart Mill came before Lord Bryce, but there two are very interesting kinds of pontification on the institution. None of these issues can be looked at in isolation. They are all interlinked and should be seen as such. I am sure we can list many more substantive reasons to subject the Indian Parliament to academic inquiry. Even though in the past couple of decades, Indian Parliament has been studied from perspectives other than legal, juridical, but a study of the kind that W.H. Morris Jones did for the first Parliament has not been undertaken. Aside from some studies from socio-political perspective appearing lately, the novel initiative at Center for Policy Research, the PRS Legislative, is putting the institution under continuous scrutiny. Yet, there is need to do much more. CPA, as I said, had organized a conference in 2002 to commemorate 50 years of Indian Parliament with the support, as I mentioned, of the IIC and KS, which resulted in a publication. The volume has been recognized for its contribution. It was only natural that we continued studying this institution as it completed 60 years. 7 sessions of this conference have been designed following consultations with a number of experts and scholars who have been kind to lend their time and energy to CPA from time to time. We cannot thank them enough. Last but not the least, I thank you all for being with us in this effort. Thank you.
Well, a good thing about such a conference is that the chairman doesn't have to do anything, because all the speakers are so well known, and that before I ask Lord Meghnad Desai to give the keynote address, all I want to say is that I'm a great admirer of his. And I told him so.
No more.
And
otherwise it'll get worse.
Because I read his column, not that I always agree with him, but he puts forward his views in that place which goes straight to you.
Right.
And again, chat shows, and I don't watch chat shows. Sometimes I participate in them on television. But he again manages somehow to put across his views on this very difficult medium, which are always worth listening to. And he is a well-known economist, and of course his knowledge, depth of politics in India needs no comment. So with these few words, I'll request Lord Meghnad Desai to give us his keynote address.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Chairman, and of course Dr. Karan Singh, distinguished panelists, friends. I have to say before I go any further, because Margaret Thatcher died earlier today, I may have to go before the very end of this session, because I've got to go do something on television on Margaret Thatcher. Sorry about that. I'll try and stay as long as I can. I have been in Parliament for 22 years, an unelected member, and in UK, life means life only in Parliament, not anywhere else. So I'm there for life. But I want to just say something about what has happened during my 20 years in Parliament, 22 years in Parliament, which has sort of implications for how we think about Indian Parliament, about which I know something, but I don't know everything. I should say to begin with, our Parliament meets 150 days per year. So and as much as Commons and Lords both meet 150 days a year, and compared to Indian Parliament, as far as I can see, we get a lot of work done. Serious amount. And this is just 150 days of session, not including select committees and other things. Anyway, for me, I think there are particular things which have happened in 20 years to reform British Parliament, which I think are very relevant to Indian Parliament. And I want to sort of follow this through. First of all is a reform of campaign finance. One of the most important thing in which there was, while British politics is considerably straightforward and accountability is there and transparency is there, it was still felt that the financing of elections, financing of donations to political parties was not completely healthy in the 1990s, the Labour Party got its large part of its funding from trade unions, sort of capitation fee and so on, and Mrs. Thatcher had changed the legislation about that, so that when a levy was put on trade union members, they had to positively agree that the levy would be taken and subscribed to political party funding. But the Conservative Party used to get large donations from various businesses and so on. And there was an attempt to reform the way parties receive donation, make it much more transparent, much more accountable. And in a sense, it came about because people were very unhappy about both unequal funding as between parties and opaque funding as between parties. Now, we have laws which you can all look up. There is a limit below which you don't have to provide names of individuals who gave money, but you have to provide how many donations you received. But above £5,000, you have to provide details of who gave the money. Now the Labour Party, when it got into office in 1997, having passed a legislation, went across to subvert it by making a sort of a little innovation. That if somebody gives a loan to the political party, then they don't have to announce it because they thought that is commercial secret. But then the dishonesty in the transaction was that the people who gave loans were sort of promised a peerage, and this was, of course, in a very good British style, understood but not actually said. But unfortunately, the diaspora is the diaspora, and one of the people who had given £2 million complained in the press that he was still waiting for his peerage, and where was it? Whereupon all hell broke loose, and we had to reform party political financing all over again. Now, I want to say that because I find the financing of Indian elections totally bizarre. I know that there's currently this little fight going on between the Election Commission and the Law Ministry, where you can see why the Law Ministry is not going to agree to the reform proposed by the Election Commission, because the Election Commission wants to make this financing more transparent. But basically, Indian political system is financed by black money, substantially by black money. And participants in the political process, as far as I know, and we all know it, but none of us can prove it, participants in the political process, either as candidates or as members, either in government or outside, have to go and get money, serious amount of money, partly to qualify as a candidate. There's a little news item recently about Karnataka where various candidates have been more or less complaining about the fact that they're supposed to bring dashes of cash to be given a ticket. I mean, no surprise. But we know it goes on. We know that party political funding, the candidate has to give money when in office or when in parliament. Parliament members use their access, even when they're in opposition, to make money. It was said by the Chief Minister of Madhya Pradesh that a certain member of Rajya Sabha had paid 56 crores to get a seat in Rajya Sabha, and he's subsequently gone bankrupt, but that is loss of his creditors, not himself. But if somebody pays 56 crores to be a Rajya Sabha member, what must he be expecting from it? I mean, nobody in British politics, as far as I know, has made money from being in politics. I can more or less vouch for that. The few people who tried have gone to jail recently. People have recently gone to jail for falsifying their expenses which they were allowed to claim. And they've been sent to jail for that, both in the House of Commons and in the House of Lords. And in the Indian political system seems to me to be in what I'd call the forbidden city, which used to be in Beijing, where the imperial family used to be and nobody could come in. And I think once you are in the political system, you're in the forbidden city. you are immune from any legal challenges, and you can carry on your life with impunity. And it's one of the most astonishing things I've seen. So I think one of the things which will have to be done by the citizens, because the political system is not going to do it, is to seriously question the financing of parliament, of elections. And unless real transparency is imposed on this, this is a perfectly good reason why black money will never be eliminated from Indian politics. Black money is functional in Indian party politics. And that is a fact. We all know that to be fact. So, and we had, as I said, we had to try again and again to reform reform financing of political parties in the UK, and so it won't be a single legislation thing. It'll be done again and again. And here I also have to say that I find the Indian media remarkably docile. We have a Rottweiler press, which just completely destroys people found to be
You don't listen to Arnav Goswami?
Sorry? No. Yeah, I even can get a word in edgewise when I'm talking to Arnav Goswami. But no, I find because in a sense one of the thing about the what happened with the Parliament MP's expenses in UK was that MP's expenses were taken against receipts, and there was a record of the receipts, and somebody tried to sell a disc of all the MPs, and while the London Times refused to buy, the Daily Telegraph did buy it. And then they basically employed 50 extra people, and day after day, each MP's expenses were listed, found out where they had done wrong, and it was just relentless. And the Speaker tried to say it was parliamentary privilege, and therefore they should not be released, and the court said, get lost. This is in public interest. Now, see, that kind of scrutiny, and of course then the Times, the London Times and the Sunday Times got to the House of Lords. And as you know, quite some considerable number of people were humiliated in that respect because they were falsifying expenses. Now, the sum of money is chicken feed by Indian standards. Let me put it this way. Even the declared assets of Indian MPs are multiple of declared assets of British MPs. Let me put it this way. So that's one thing. Secondly, I feel that the next sort of reforms we had to do is actually in terms of the power of the executive as against the legislature. I find the Indian executive inordinately more powerful than the legislature. Indeed, one of the reasons why the legislature doesn't actually do very much is because legislature has no power. I'm just learning this stuff, but but 2 years ago, 18 bills were passed in 5 minutes or something like that. Maybe 7 minutes. I may be exaggerating, but bills get discussed in standing committees. And I think, as far as I can see, standing committee process is not as visible and as transparent as discussion on the floor of the House. It seems to me that by the time a bill comes to the floor of the House, the Indian Parliament is very shy of getting votes taken. Votes are avoided as far as possible. And apparently the whole process is designed so that there is no disagreement on any legislation or minimal disagreement on legislation, and the thing is wrapped up with consensual agreement before something is passed. Now, obviously, every political culture has its own way of doing things. But I'm used to a politics in which the House of Commons, of course, has a bill. It goes through the second reading, committee report, third reading. House of Lords, of course, has this committee, what we call away from the floor of the House, upstairs, because a few people are put on the committee and deliberate upon a bill. The House of Lords becomes a committee. The entire House becomes a committee when a committee says a bill is taken. So anybody can come in and can go out. And in House of Lords also has a different convention from House of Commons. Any member can divide on any amendment. Can divide out on any amendment. But the amendment may not be in the person's name. But if he can find two tellers, he can insist on dividing the House. And we have frequent divisions. The government loses amendments, government wins amendments, day after day. And one of the few things I have to do as a member is be there, because my whip send me a message on my mobile, minister replying, be ready for division, division now, go, we are content, and all that. So we're used to government being challenged, amendments being passed, which then the government has to agree. If the House of Commons disagree with the House of Lords, we have what is called ping pong in between until both sides agree to a set of amendments. But this sort of antagonism between the government and the opposition, or between the House of Commons and the House of Lords, is not shied away from, because the political process is enriched by the fact that these disagreements are open. And in those disagreements, some very fundamental changes can be made to the bill at hand. And most recently, the bill following the ordinance, following Justice Verma's report, I was astonished how quickly it was passed. I just cannot imagine anything like that happening in the British Parliament. We would have had, 500 amendments before you even started anywhere. So I think there is something about the political process in Parliament that I think needs to be seriously examined. And as far as I can understand, it is the 9th schedule which is a problem. Because what the 9th schedule does, it gives a political party complete dominance over its members. So if you are an MP for a political party, you have to obey the whip, or else, because that is part of the thing. And so consultations can be done between leaders of parties as a conclave, and they can cook up a bill away from the floor of the House, and that's it. So individual members cannot actually disagree with the party's position. And now one of the great delights in British parliamentary history is that to a certain extent I can disagree with my party's position. Sometimes my party would prefer that I do not vote against or the party, and I abstain, especially when my party was in power. My whip used to say, listen, I know you're not in favor. Please just go away and have a cup of tea while the division is going on. And I used to say that all of us have a limited allowance of disobedience. We have to use it carefully. But we have in the House of Lords, because what can they do to me? They can't throw me out, because nobody can throw me out. In the House of Commons, whips have more power because they can threaten you with all sorts of dire consequences. But there is a culture of debate and discussion and improvement and reform of a bill. And that's what parliamentary activity is about. And I think it's because that side of parliamentary activity is lacking that the only way opposition can oppose is by bringing everything to a standstill. The only power the opposition has is to stop proceedings. Otherwise, there is no other power the opposition has. So I think to a certain extent people ought to look at the 9th schedule very carefully and examine whether that has not done a great damage to the power of Parliament. I also find, and I'm told this is, actually Jay Panda wrote a very, very good article about it about 3-4 months ago, that the parliamentary procedures followed by the Lok Sabha were laid down in 1919 during the Montagu-Chelmsford reforms. And they were written in such a way that the executive will always have dominance over which bills are put to vote. That is bizarre. That is completely utter. It was done to have the British members of Parliament total dominance over natives, as it were. Now that there are only natives and no foreigners, why don't the natives seize power and do something about this procedure? But I think that kind of parliamentary procedure, in which the executive has total domination over the conduct of parliamentary business, seems to me to be very strange. What our system, as far as I can see, I've never been a been a chief whip, but we have what I call usual channels, which is a meeting of the whips, the chief whips of the parties, of government and opposition. And they have to decide upon the business. And while to a certain extent government does have its own needs, and sort of the adage is, a government must have its bill. But the government may have its bill, but not at its own price. We can give it hell for a long time. And so there is this idea that the order of business is decided consensually by government and opposition, but then it's open to members, individual members, not to follow what the usual channels are doing, and we can go on a rampage. And I remember once, just as in the dying days of the major administration, in the House of Commons, Jack Straw, who was that time Shadow Home Secretary, had worked up a compromise with Michael Howard, who was the Home Secretary, and the bill was before us, something to do with police or crime, and we didn't want it. And I remember James Callaghan, ex-Prime Minister, and then he said, "With this we shall not put up," and he organized a massive revolt of the House of Lords section of the Labour Party to disagree with what the House of Commons had cooked up. And we got the bill delayed and delayed and delayed, because whatever the House of Commons may have done, we were not going to stand for it. Now, this kind of behavior, of course, it takes place within certain rules, because ultimately the government gets its way. Ultimately the House of Lords has to submit to the House of Commons, because they are the elected people and we are unelected. But the political culture is improved and enhanced by the fact that legislators actually contribute to legislation. That's what they are there for. That's what I'm there for. I enjoy legislating because that is what I'm there for. I have to give. And while I'm legislating, lots of lobbying firms send me material to speak on. They suggest amendments to put, and the activity in the periphery of Parliament, which is informed and which is trying to get us to take certain positions. Of course, we may choose to take or not take a position, but we are always being bombarded, I would say, by material, by sort of interested parties. So I think what is important here is that parliamentary activity as a healthy, ongoing activity, which is recorded and published, because every day's proceedings are in next day's Hansard. I'm sure the same true is here, but the Hansard is very often read, both online and in print. So you have not only a very active parliament, but you have a interested public, which is constantly informed about what is going on, because they access Hansard and they write letters to newspapers and things like that. Now, that kind of democratic political activity in the public space, I find is missing in India. I may be wrong on that, but as far as I can see, both in newspapers and elsewhere, there are NGOs and so on, but the constant interplay between Parliament and as it were, the gallery watching Parliament, that is not there. And I'm sure there will be some procedural reforms to go through. And lastly, let me just say one thing, because I don't have very much time. Another major improvement, which was done starting from the 1990s, was with the Code of Ethics of Parliamentary Behavior. It was done because there was a sting operation by some Sunday Times journalists who offered £1,000 to a couple of Conservative MPs to ask a question in Parliament. And of course, when they asked a question, then they were exposed. At which point, a committee was appointed on conduct in public life under Justice Nolan. And the Nolan report has now laid down certain do's and don'ts of behavior in public life, especially for parliamentarians. For example, there's a register of interests. All of us have to fill in a very detailed register of interest. All the interests we have, we may want to speak on some topic, we have to announce what our interests are, which may conflict with the subject at hand. But also in terms of incomes gained outside parliament, trips financed, maybe by somebody else. Each trip has got to be detailed and things provided. And of course, falsification leads to a punishment by a parliamentary commissioner. The parliamentary commissioner who judges infringement of these rules, and there are consequences. Recently, one member of the Labour Party, MP, Dennis McShane, had to finally resign his parliamentary seat because they found to have falsified. He submitted bills for some laptop things that purchased, which he had sort of not purchased, or he exaggerated. And it was a matter of £300, but he had to resign. Now, it's that kind of ethics of behavior which was imposed by the parliamentary system itself to improve it. Now, I doubt very much whether the Indian Parliament has the moral fiber to do that. Done? Oh, you're waving something at me. Okay.
We have a code of ethics.
Yeah.
And I'll read it out to you when you finish.
How many people have gone to jail for violating the code?
Several ministers have gone to jail, in fact.
Oh, wow. Well, good. Well, more the better.
I don't think any of your ministers have ever gone to jail.
Oh,
We've
no,
had
no,
a situation
they have.
where after the cabinet meeting, the police was waiting outside. One of the ministers was taken straight to Tihar jail.
Oh, that's very nice. Well, I'm very encouraged by that. I think the more the merrier. All I can say. Okay, I stand corrected and respect, but my impression is that there are gross violations of code of ethics in Indian Parliament, and not enough punishment. Sorry. Okay. Anyway, I don't want to kind of start a conversation in the middle of all this. Let me because I don't really have much more time. Let me say, I think there's obviously a lot to learn from experience of British Parliament, because British Parliament doesn't think itself to be a fully adequate system, and there's constant pressure to reform. And the pressure to reform comes both from within itself and from the antagonistic culture between government and opposition, as well as what I call the surrounding gallery of people interested in public life, in improving the quality of legislation, people who are lobbying us. And I think that kind of healthy give and take between public and parliament, and within parliament, between government and opposition, and even within the opposition, the kind of disagreements between the leadership and the backbenchers. And I'm a backbencher, have been backbencher for all these years. So that is a very healthy process. I think, especially like again the backbenchers, the 9th schedule, as far as I can see, prevents people from disagreeing with the party. Sorry? 10th schedule, whatever. Pick a number, any number. But the number which says you have to do what your chief whip tells you. So I will stop there and just hope that the rest of the people gave you better information than I've been able to give. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord Desai, for giving us a very interesting address, and all from his personal experience both in England and in India. I now request for the second keynote address, Dr. Florian Hartleb. Have I pronounced it correctly?
Yes.
I'm afraid I had asked for a few lines to introduce him, and they sent me 14 pages. So I'll introduce you as an eminent scholar. He's written many books. He's contributed chapters in many books, and he is in various discussions and seminars, and has in-depth knowledge of not only politics and parliamentary procedures in his own country, but in the world at large. May I now request you to give the second keynote. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the kind invitation. Dear ladies and gentlemen, also thank you very much to my dear friend of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, Mr. Tomislav Delinic. I cooperate very much with this foundation as a former scholar of this, and I'm very happy to be here. Actually, I was a speaker 1.5 years ago in Sri Lanka. It was after the Breivik case. I was talking on the security center on terrorism after this horrible terrorist attacks. And now for this conference, I find it very interesting, the topic of this conference, because the program is very ambitious, first of all, for the next days. And you want to tackle many aspects which we also have in the European discussion, and very important aspects. First of all, there's one aspect which we discuss in many European countries, and as well, I'm a German, also in the German context. This is a question of gender and gender equality. And we had a discussion in many political parties to increase the women's participation and also to have some kind of quotas for women, that women are better represented in party politics, and when women are better represented in party politics, it also means directly that more women are in the parliament, right? And this is a very, very important topic. Also, especially the center-right, the conservative parties, they switched to this topic, which was actually more left-wing topic. Emancipation, gender was more in the European context, a left-wing topic, but now it's common sense, and it's one of the most important topics we discuss, actually. And you will also have a lecture for this tomorrow. Another very important topic we discussed in the whole European context is, especially now in the Euro crisis, where some countries, especially in the south, Portugal, especially Greece, and other countries, Cyprus, are deeply affected. It's the role of the parliament in this whole context of the Euro crisis, and the role of the parliament in the foreign policy. You also will discuss it in this conference. And another very important topic, and I saw in the program that some journalists are involved, or some experienced journalists, and this was a debate. Also, we had an expert commission in the German parliament, the whole role of digital democracy, and how the use of social media maybe changes the politics. Maybe it leads to more transparency, but obviously it also has some dangers, like more anti-elitism, that people can complain very much anonymously. But this whole context of digital democracy, that every meeting goes directly to the public via Twitter, via Facebook, and so on, this is a big issue also which we discuss in the national context and in Europe, and I think this is a topic we have to discuss also in the whole role of democracies, democratic transition, revolutions. We discussed this role in the Arab Spring, but as well in some other protest movements. So I think these three topics, to sum up gender, foreign policy, the role of parliament in foreign policy, and the role of media, at least from my point of view, the most important topics, or the most interesting topics. I will be glad to listen to it. And in general, it's no doubt that parliaments do matter. We heard much from your expertise on the role of Westminster, on the role of parliamentary sovereignty, and the whole role of the parliament for the democratic discourse and for the democratic culture. There's no doubt that without any culture in the parliament, and I can remember when I saw them photos in Russia when people were beating each other in the parliament, or in Ukraine, this is not a sign for a healthy democracy. This is more a sign for authoritarian system. Something is misleading, and the bilateral respect to each other and the rules of the Westminster model, this is very, very important when we discuss on this topic. When I give you the special German perspective, I have to show you this photo, because this is very important. Maybe it's the most important symbol in Germany, at least next to the Brandenburg Gate, or even it's a symbol more. It's a symbol for the unification of Germany, for the new era of peace. And this also is a sign here for the Berlin Reichstag. It's a sign for the German unification, because, as you all know, Germany was separated and the capital was in Bonn. Bonn was a smaller city in the west of Germany, and after the unification, at the beginning of the 90s, real debates started in the parliament about should the parliament go back to Berlin as it was in the past. Maybe it's too much nationalism. There were huge debates, and it was very contradictory in the 90s. And at the end, a small majority decided that the parliament will move from Bonn to Berlin. And that's actually the result of this. And even now we are speaking about the Berlin Republic without any nationalism. But of course it's a bit of patriotism, because of course as a German you have to be proud that we achieved the unification, and it was a very important process. And the parliament debate in the 90s was very important on this topic, and it also shows how important the parliament is for the whole political system.
Excuse me, is that the one that was burnt down or a new one?
Yes.
Reichstag fire is well known.
Yes, exactly.
Is this the one that was burned down and
exactly.
rebuilt, or is it in a different place?
Exactly. This was a propaganda with a fire, you mean, the Reichstag fire. It was a propaganda Hitler used actually to delete every sense of democracy and parliamentary culture, because he said that it was a communist attack. It's still not revealed 100%, but it was a fire, and of course it's a symbol as well for the dark sides of the German history. And this is also why it means that it's not a new nationalism, but it also shows that history is present. And there are many links combined with this Reichstag. And this Bundestag, the name of the German parliament, it's the core of the political system. Actually, in the deep tradition to the Westminster model of European democracies, and in Europe, in whole Europe, most of the systems are parliamentary systems. So we don't have the system of the United States with a strong president. Actually, the whole government is dependent from the parliament and not from the president. So this means, for example, that the German parliament, the Bundestag, is the only political body which is directly elected from the people. So actually, the parliament elects the chancellor, Angela Merkel, now since a couple of years. And this also means that the parliament has a strong legitimation, because we will have the next parliamentary election this autumn. And actually this is a big competition, not only for the parliament, but as a direct consequence, who is the next in the government. And in most of times, as in most of European countries, we have coalitions in governments. This means that we have actually in Germany a big partner and a smaller partner, so we have actually coalition governments. What is very important for understanding the German rule of the parliament is that there is a deep unity between the majority of the parliament with the government. So they're from the same political parties, and actually they work together very closely, and the chancellor is very dependent as well to the head of the fraction, and the majority of the government is in close unity, and the real opposition is of course not the majority in the parliament, it's a minority in the parliament. This means that we have this dualism between the government on the one side and the majority of the parliament, and the minority of the parliament on the other side. This is very important, and as well it's very important to say that political parties have a big influence in the whole political system. At the moment we have 5 different political fractions. You know that the political parties, when they are in the parliament, they have a new unity of organization, it's called fraction, and we have 5 different fractions in Germany at this moment. We have the center-right parties, then we have the Social Democrats, then we have the Liberals, then we have the Greens. The Greens are a bitter product from the 80s, from these emancipation movements, from these peace movements. We had this, we were afraid in Europe at the beginning of the 80s with a nuclear power and with the Cold War. And this is kind of a product of these developments at the beginning of the 80s. And then we have, as a product of the German unification, you know that Eastern Germany was communist, kind of post-communist, post-socialist party, which is actually very strong in Eastern Germany. So we have 5 fractions. Two fractions are in the government at this moment, so the center-right party and the liberals, as a small party. Before we had a big coalition between the center-right party and the Social Democrats. But actually we have a big partner and a small partner. And the discipline in the fraction is very strong because, as you know, that there are many meetings in the parliament. I worked in the parliament, so I saw this. There are every week discussions, internal discussions, and actually the focus is of the head of the fraction is that everybody votes for one side, and this means that actually when you see how the fraction works in the parliament, it's very professional and it's more management. And when you are as a MP against the whole line, then maybe you are not elected for the next time, or you don't get a good place on the party list. So it's very important that the fraction itself works on a very professional way. And this also means on the other side that the single MP, he doesn't have so much influence because in most of topics he has to vote. There is no force, but indeed there is some force. When we had now such sensitive topics like the war in Afghanistan or recently the Euro crisis, there were some MPs who said, no, we are for peace, or there were some MPs who said, we as Germans, we are the richest country in Europe, so actually now it's this deep crisis. Europe is very dependent on the German economy, and there were some MPs who said that Germany shouldn't pay for Greece or shouldn't pay for Portugal for this whole helping packages, but there was big pressure also from the government, from Ms. Merkel, and these MPs were actually very unpopular in the parliament to vote against this majority opinion. It's no secret that, and this is the most important role, and you already, Lord, you already emphasized it. It's the control of the government, the control function, which has to work for a healthy democracy. And the other most important thing you also mentioned is that the legislation function we have in Germany, we have 2 chambers. First of all, the Bundestag, and then the Bundesrat, the other chamber, and this Bundesrat represents the countries, because we in Germany, we have, because of our history, late unification, we had the unification in the end of the 19th century, we have still a very strong federalism. So I come from Bavaria. Bavaria is very not a country which fights for independence or something, but it has its own sovereignty and its own pride, and so this means also that many countries in Germany are very federalist. We have some limits for the representation. They have the 5% hurdle that not too many parties can enter in the parliament. And if we want to understand the German constitution, it's still called Grundgesetz because after 1949, when we had West Germany, we said that it's provisional and it will be a constitution only after the German unification. And much of this, and it's still until now, it's called Grundgesetz. But very important to understand is that we learned from the first German democracy, from the Weimar Republic. So we have a weak president, for example. We have the 5% hurdle that not too many parties enter the parliament. And many of these things, also that the parliament can kick out actually the chancellor, but then they have to bring in an alternative. So the chancellor is dependent on the majority of the government, but if the parliament wants to have another chancellor, they need a concrete alternative, that there is no lack of leadership. This is very important because all these rules, They didn't exist in this Weimar Republic, what we had in Germany before the National Socialism. So, as you all know, is that Hitler came to power legally, and there were some mistakes, and also in the constitution. And we tried, after this disaster, we tried to improve the constitution that it works, and that also that the government is controlled by the parliament. Another thing is also very important for the parliament, as I said, as a body with the strongest legitimation, that the communication. This means that visitor groups go to the parliament, that the parliament has information to the public, that the parliament is a symbol for the democracy, that the parliament works closely with media and with parliamentary groups and also with missions throughout the world. As you know, is that many German MPs go to Asia, go to your countries here, just to discover, to have some expertise in the fields of foreign policy. And it's also very important that you know that these are missions, official missions from the MPs. Concerning the power question, the Chancellor needs his support. He needs a majority of the parliament, and it's possible that the parliament says that the Chancellor doesn't have the majority anymore. It was twice in the history, one successful. This meant that the Chancellor has to be replaced. And another thing is that if the Chancellor feels that he doesn't have the trust of the majority in the parliament, he can ask for confidence, especially in these sensitive questions such as, I already spoke about this, Euro crisis or Afghanistan war. These are very sensitive questions, and then the Chancellor can ask for the support. Actually, when we have a look on the structure of the German parliament, how it works, it's very important to see that it's called, we have this distinction in the political literature or political science literature, we say we have either the working parliament or the speaking parliament. Actually, the German parliament is a working parliament. There are not so many plenary sessions like in other countries, like in UK, like in the United States. But we have in the plenum, where everybody is there from the MPs, we have very emotional debates. But they are kind of artificial debates, because the real work in the parliament, it is in the committees, in the smaller units. And of course, in these committees, we have different priorities. Very important are the fields such as the working and social affairs, the foreign affairs, budget. Budget is the core question of the parliament, internal affairs, and economics. So, of course, we have different priorities. We have either directly elected MPs who have a certain district, so they are kind of a manager of the district. They have very close contact to the people within the district. And then we have other more anonymous MPs who are elected via party lists. So actually the MP who is directly elected from the people, he has much more tasks, and he is more important because he's representing the district, and he's kind of a manager. We have almost now, in Germany we have 80 million people, inhabitants, and we have now at the moment almost 600 members in this 17th session since 1949. But it will change for the next time, because we have a very complicated electoral law. We already now, in the moment, we had to change it even, the electoral law, because the Constitutional Court in Germany said there are some statistical mistakes which we have to avoid. So it can be that there are more MPs or less, so it's very complicated. It's very, electoral law, it would be another 3 days conference for this understanding, so it's very complicated. As I told, we have less male than in India in the parliament, but we also have almost 70% male, and we are trying to increase the percentage of women with woman quota, and this gender issue is really now a very important thing. Of course, like in most of European democracies or worldwide, most of MPs have a university degree. Some are professional politicians, starting as children in politics, going to university and after university entering parliament, so they never worked outside politics. Actually, these are bad examples in my view, but of course politics is a profession, and most of the politicians are academics. Many of them have civil servant positions, and of course it's always hard when you work, for example, as a manager in economics, to have the time to work in politics when you can do it in the evenings or on weekend, but it's very hard. So actually most of them are civil servants or work in the public sector. And of course when you started the career in the parliament, most of politicians want to be re-elected, so they are disciplined in the fraction, that they have not a negative image, negative reputation, that they have the chance to be re-elected. So almost 80% of the MPs in the last period in Germany were re-elected. And we have, of course, as every time you spoke about this, we have this problem of corruption in every democracy, or it's not automatically a problem, but it's in every democracy a sensitive topic, because on the one side we have some special rights for the MPs, which we didn't have in the first German democracy, like immunity, indemnity, and so on. But now we have new rules, and it's changing all the time, that politicians have to be transparent concerning special income. The MPs, in Germany, it's called Diets. They don't have a fixed salary, but they get a special compensation for their work. But next to this Diets, it's possible for the MPs to get some extra money, to have some other positions, but they have to be transparent. So in the last rule, I guess it was two years ago, a new law. It means that on the official home pages, every politician has at least to mention which positions he has in economics and so on. And this question of extra money, of course, is a very important topic for the credibility of the democracy itself. And it's, of course, it's always a discussion, especially now the parliament want to increase the income, so-called income, the diets of the MPs. And of course, media write critically every time about this when politicians in parliament, then they decide that they should get more money. Of course, it's kind of very sensitive topic, and politicians have to be very careful because media starting to campaign against it. Actually, this is my last remark. Some tendencies, maybe it's also possible to compare and to generalize these tendencies. And I would say for the German case, or even for the European case, I see three tendencies. We have actually already started also in UK with the Tony Blair, for example, the discussion on the role of leadership. We have on the one side the parliamentary sovereignty, but especially now when politics gets more and more complex, the European level gets more and more decisive. There are difficult, sensitive questions like the Afghanistan war, or Iraq war, or maybe now North Korea, such difficult questions. And this also means that maybe there is a more need or more desire for leadership, for a strong, in the German case, for a strong chancellor. What we also saw in the German case is, with this new symbol of the Berlin Republic, there are many more media in Berlin than it was before in the small city in Bonn. There are many more lobbyists, so there is, and you can see it in empirical data, there is a bigger influence of the media and of the lobbyists. And this means for the democratic culture that we have the so-called Stimmungsdemokratie. It means the democracy, it's based on popular moods. It means everything gets more and more hectical. Moods are changing a lot in emotions, and this means that it could be that there is a hype today about a special politician. We had this case in Germany, or a hype on a special party. We had a new party of young activists, the Pirate Party, with new technologies. But after 3-4 months, it's already over, this phenomenon. So we have this kind of emotional, also with the media, with the growing influence of the media, and also maybe now with the digital democracy tools that emotions are changing a lot. Supports for politicians for issues. And this also means that the voting behavior is less and less stable. So this means also that the opinion polls, they can't predict before elections the results anymore, because we have some kind of last-minute swings in the elections. We saw in many elections now in Germany that the opinion polls, they couldn't predict the results because of this last-minute swings, this kind of popular moods, these emotions, and this very changing supports towards politicians. The only stable thing now in the German politics is the big support for the Chancellor Merkel, because she's not very charismatic from her personality, but she showed that she really works very hard for politics, that she took over some leadership for the Euro crisis, and she has a personal support now in the opinion polls in Germany, 80% or even more. So most likely she will stay after the elections in autumn as a chancellor, and people appreciate her behavior. And especially because of this growing influence of the European Union topic, now we have this big mess with the euro currency, that we see that the fiscal policy is not unified enough, that we have this big collapse of countries. With the worst case in Greece, now in Cyprus, and nobody knows what's going on. And this certainly means that the European level will go more and more important, and nobody knows in which direction it will go. So there are some politicians in Germany who are saying that we need the United States of Europe, but what we certainly need are stricter rules and a more common fiscal policy, and that this will be the biggest challenge for the European democracies, and also it will be the challenge for the national parliaments. And this is my closing remark, because the question is, in all this complexity of politics, how much power the national parliament still has. Because we also saw in these Euro crisis debates that many politicians didn't know about how to solve the crisis, what is really behind this, and maybe it's also the case that politics gets too complex, but certainly it seems that the European democracies get more and more unified, and that the European level gets more and more important. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Hartleb, for giving us some insight into the functioning of the German parliamentary system. I had difficulty doing justice to introduction of Dr. Hartleb. I have even more difficulty in introducing our chief guest tonight, Dr. Karan Singh, because he's a multidimensional personality. He was at a crucial position in the making of history of independent India. He has been an active politician. He was a member of the Lok Sabha, a member of the Raj Sabha. But his most important dimension of his personality is erudition. He is a scholar, has written many books. And it's always a pleasure listening to him. Unfortunately, we don't hear him much in the Rajya Sabha, which he's a member. And that shows how our parliamentary system has undergone a change. Because in our parliamentary system, people like Dr. Karan Singh were supposed to play a key role. Now he is almost totally silent, because the distinction between the Lok Sabha...
I'm a trained speaker, but not a trained shouter.
Lok Sabha and Raj Sabha has almost disappeared. May I, sir, request you to give the inaugural address.
Thank you, Chairman, for your generous remarks, and fellow panelists. This was supposed to be an inaugural address, but we've already had two interesting speeches, and I think that my good friend Meghnad Desai made a very good inauguration of this session today. I must admit, I saw the papers on this seminar only 45 minutes before I arrived. So I have not been able to study the papers. However, looking through the list of contributors and the delegates, I'm very impressed because they cover a very wide spectrum of items relating to Parliament, and also some very distinguished people have been involved in this. So I'm sure that this is going to be an extremely fruitful session. I would just make, as I said, I have not actually read through the papers, and so I can't comment in depth. I just make some general remarks about the topic. Firstly, let me say that Parliament is the cornerstone of our democracy and is an irreplaceable institution. I notice that because there is such a lot of noise and people are generally disillusioned with politicians, they tend to try and trash the institutions. That is very unfortunate. Without Parliament, we would not be a democracy at all. It is Parliament that really ensures that we remain, and we have remained, a democratic, functioning and vibrant democracy for what, 60 years, over 60 years. And therefore I think that the importance of Parliament should not be judged by the general situation, opinion with regard to parliamentarians. I would like to make that distinction, which I think is of some significance. And our Constitution, I think, is a most remarkable document. It has been amended over 100 times, which means that Parliament can update it or can adjust it according to the changing requirements. It is not rigid. I think this is tremendously important, because when the Constitution was adopted in 1950, the whole socio-economic political situation in India was entirely different. And the fact that over these 60 years we have had these almost 100 amendments means that there is the flexibility built into our Constitution to adjust according to the requirements of the moment. So I would say that not the Constitution and Parliament also are really most extraordinary institutions, and both can be improved, mind you, and I'll come to that. But basically, they are the bedrock. My own experience in Parliament, Meghnad has done 23 years, I've done 35 years in Parliament. I've done 35 years, both houses of Parliament, and in both cases on the Treasury benches and in the opposition. So I've really gone through the whole gamut of parliamentary experience. Let me say that in some ways, perhaps the Lok Sabha today is more closely representative of India than the first Lok Sabha was. The first Lok Sabha they were brilliant people, they were men and women of outstanding caliber. But were they representative of India? I don't know. Is Parliament becoming, in fact, more representative of India? This is just an idea that I want to put, because what does democracy means? Representation. And the sort of people who elect are the sort of people who get elected. And so you've had a sea change in 60 years. You've had previously excluded castes and classes have been drawn into the political system, which is very important. So in a way, if you look at it, the Parliament today is much more truly representative of India than was the brilliant Constituent Assembly or the first Parliament, where there were outstanding minds. They were people of unmatched ability. Even when I entered the Lok Sabha in 1967, the fourth Lok Sabha, there were outstanding figures like Hiren Mukherjee and Somnath Chatterjee and Indrajit Gupta and Nath Pai and Madhulle Mai. I mean, I'm talking the opposition ones who were really brilliant. We weren't able to match them in the Treasury benches as far as individual ability was concerned. They were there. There has been, I must say, a fairly sharp erosion of procedures in Parliament. And that is something which has been a matter of great distress. In fact, I have been chairman for 8 years of the Ethics Committee of the Raj Sabha. And we introduced for the first time a code of conduct for members of the Raj Sabha. The code that Meghnad was referring to when I waved this around. And you see, it's never followed. Unfortunately, the code is there. But the code is never followed. But the code is there, and it says, and I'll just read the first paragraph, members of the Rajya Sabha should acknowledge their responsibility to maintain the public trust reposed in them and should work diligently to discharge their mandate for the common good of the people. They must hold in high esteem the Constitution, the law, parliamentary institutions, and above all the general public. They should constantly strive to translate the ideals laid down in the preamble of the Constitution into a reality. The following are the principles which they should abide, and the first one is, members must not do anything that brings disrepute to the Parliament and affects their credibility. And I'm afraid what's happening is that these constant disruptions that take place are definitely eroding the credibility of the entire parliamentary system. Ved asked why I didn't speak. You cannot speak in all the tumult that is there. Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, one of the great scientists, he was a member. Kapila Vatsyayan was a member. Kasturi Rangan was a member. They never got a chance to speak. You would have thought that if there was a structured debate, you would have outstanding people who would make a contribution. But the way the houses have developed and the sort of constant disruptions that are beginning to take place are really very unfortunate. And very dangerous, I think, because if they erode the credibility of the Parliament, then, as I said earlier, there doesn't seem to be an alternative option, unless it's a swing into some kind of authoritarianism, which is not going to work in a country like India, or into chaos. So what we have to do is to recenter, reorient the whole parliamentary system and parliamentary functioning. We have all our institutions in place. We have the Ethics Committee. We started it in the Rajya Sabha. Lok Sabha has now also apparently begun the process. We have a Business Advisory Committee meeting regularly. So it is not as if the government lays down what is to be discussed and rides roughshod. There's a Business Advisory Committee with all the parties represented. Every morning they meet and decide what is to be discussed. So it is not just the arbitrariness of the executive, as Meghnad was trying to suggest. We have a register of interests. This ethics committee, we laid down 5 parameters in which the members have to announce their interests, and if they speak on any of those subjects, they are supposed to announce that they have an interest in the subject. All our assets are regularly disclosed and published. They're on, with the right to information, they're on the net. So it isn't as if we've become some kind of medieval authoritarian structure. That is not true. We have excellent institutions. The only trouble is that we are not working them properly. Now, for example, the disruption. I keep trying to tell my friends in the opposition, the biggest favor you can do to the government is to disrupt the House. Because when you disrupt the House, the government doesn't need to give any reply. What you should be doing is to have a structured debate and haul the government over the coals. If they have done something wrong, attack them. But if you disrupt the House, there is no debate. And the most tragic thing is that the question hour is disrupted. Now, I don't know how, I'm sure all of you know, how much money it takes to answer one question. Lakhs of rupees. Lakhs of rupees are spent because with every question that comes, you've got to make all the inquiries and you've got to see everything. And the question hour is the 1 hour when the backbencher or the non-governmental people get an opportunity to ask clarifications. And if the question hour is disrupted, I think that is really the biggest tragedy. There are 2 great tragedies that are happening. One is the disruption of the question hour. That is something which hits at the very heart of the parliamentary system. Because the question hour is a very special hour. You can ask questions on anything under the sun, and the minister has got to get up and answer it. You could ask supplementary questions. That is the real test of the government and the test of the caliber of a minister. Now that being disrupted, 10 people walk into the well of the House shouting slogans, and makes it impossible for the House to function. The second great tragedy is that because of these disruptions, we are not able to discuss in depth the legislation and the matters that when there is a structured debate, which occasionally there is, it's very good. It's a very good debate. Every party from the opposition all the way around to the government is able to make their case. And there are some very, very good speakers there. But sometimes, as was said, billions of rupees worth of budgets are just passed by voice vote. Those in favor say aye, those against say no. I think the ayes have it, ayes have it, ayes have it, finished. I mean, this is not the way. This is not fair either to the people of India or to the opposition. So therefore, my basic point is that the disruption of Parliament is becoming serious and dangerous. Whole sessions have been disrupted. I'm not trying to blame any particular party. Whole sessions have been disrupted. You remember one session of both houses was disrupted because of the demand for a JPC. Both houses, the whole session went. Crores and crores of rupees were wasted. Are we not doing a grave disservice to our country if we allow this to happen? So this is one point I would like to make, that the whole legislative process is being distorted on that. It's not true that we cannot have amendments. We have amendments. The upper house can also force amendments. You remember in the FDI, in retail, it was passed by the Lok Sabha, but the Rajya Sabha had to make an amendment to say that the states were free to take their own decisions. Otherwise, previously, it was a sort of a compulsory law for the whole country. But there was so much pressure from the states that we had to change the law. So the laws do get amended, but the procedures are sometimes very difficult. Now, this brings me to another very important point, that the rise of the regional parties, to my mind, is a process of democratization. There are a lot of people who condemn the rise of the regional parties. What is this, regional parties everywhere? But the regional parties are the ones who really articulate the aspirations of this huge country. You were talking of the European Union. There are Europeans here. If you consider the whole of Europe, from Norway to Greece, and from Portugal to Poland, and you look upon that as a single country, and you double the number of people, and you quadruple the number of languages, then you will begin to understand what India is. Therefore, you cannot judge India like you can judge Singapore. I love Singapore, mind you. I have nothing against Singapore. But you cannot judge India by those sort of benchmarks. And without the regional parties, there are regional parties everywhere. There are regional parties in Jammu and Kashmir, in the Tamil Nadu, there are regional parties in Orissa, and all the way across. Without the regional parties, you would not get the democratization of the country. I know that there are dangers, there are difficulties, because the regional parties sometimes make it very difficult for governance to take place, because they have their comparatively limited interests, and those interests do not always gel with the broader interest. But nonetheless, that is part of the price that we have to pay for a functioning democracy. And therefore, another point I would like to make, that just because regional parties are developing and the so-called the large parties are dwindling in their influence, we shouldn't therefore feel that our democracy is beginning to totter. Certainly the days of single party domination are over, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't accept or understand the importance of the regional parties. And also, I think he was talking about coalitions. Our friend, the professor, was talking about coalitions in Germany with the magnificent number of 2 parties in coalition. Do you know in UPA 1, we had 21 parties in our coalition? And now in UPA 2, we started, I think, with 11. We're losing some of them on the way, but that's a different matter. But we have, you see, so multiple parties. Some one-member party. One person is a party. I think the Indian Muslim League is 1 member or something. And ਉਹ ਤਾਂ ਜੰਮੂ ਹੈ ਨਾ ਜੀ, ਇੱਥੇ ਨਹੀਂ, ਇੱਥੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ. And the thing is, this electoral disparate and fragmented public opinion is being thrown up now. And I have no doubt whatsoever that even in the next elections that take place, there will be almost the same type of fragmentation. Now, when you have a fragmented mandate, what do? You have to cobble together a coalition, otherwise you can't run the government. The constitution will collapse if you don't form a government. You can't form a government unless you have 272 members. You can't get 272 members unless you take on board at least a dozen parties. So this is a compulsion. And this is a compulsion that has to be handled. It's becoming very difficult, I agree with you. And this brings me to my next and probably final point, because I can go on at length on this, but that is that electoral reform is essential. And one of the electoral reforms could be that not every political party gets recognized. Today, I believe there are 100 political parties that are recognized. And some people just set up political parties as sort of a tax haven, because you can deduct your income tax or something from it. Now, if the election commission were to lay down that below a certain percentage, I think in Europe you mentioned 5% or whatever, the party would not be recognized, then you'd automatically get down to about 15 parties or 16 parties in the Lok Sabha. That itself could be a major amendment. You could have an amendment to say that the state funding of elections that was mentioned, that could be done to some extent. Because otherwise, how do you cover these huge constituencies? Let me tell you, Professor Hartleb, my constituency in the Lok Sabha was 7,000 square miles. I do not know how much does that work out in kilometers. 12,500 or something square kilometers, bigger than many countries in Europe. And you're supposed to cover that whole thing, and each one of us, as you know, represents, in the Lok Sabha, represents 2 crores of people, 20 lakh people. So, 2 million people. So, how do you cover them? How do you get to them? Unless there is some organization made through the state funding, there's no way that you can cover these constituencies. We've got to increase the number of constituencies. We've got to have some form of state funding also, particularly for transportation and all. Even if you sit in a jeep and travel 12,500 kilometers, you will overspend the limit that is laid down in the Representation of the People's Act. So that is not realistic. I think that is an area where we've been talking about reforms. We did the IIC Constitution of India Committee, you remember. Dr. Subhash Kashyap was the convener, I was the chairman. We came out with a report about 10 or 15 years ago, and with some very good recommendations. Got appointed, and then everything got rejected along with that. So we are in good company with Justice Venkatachalaya. So therefore, as I say, our parliament is a very remarkable institution. We do follow norms. We have codes of conduct. We have generational change is an interesting point. The regional parties I've mentioned, rise of OBCs and other castes I've mentioned, and a generational change is taking place. Definitely, although the age of this parliament is going up, I think you will see that in the next parliament, there is going to be a considerable drop in the average age. And that, I think, is a good thing, because it means that more and more young people are getting into politics. Now, there's often criticism that, the young people, because they are sons of politicians or daughters of politicians. Well, a son of a doctor is most likely to become a doctor, isn't he? A son of a lawyer is most likely to become a lawyer. Why should a son of a politician not want to become a politician? I mean, what I'm saying is, they grow up in an atmosphere of politics.
If the father is a chief in his
तो वही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ, वही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ. That's what I'm trying to say. Now, what is being said is that young people who are not, I was coming to that point, what is being said is, first of all, you want young people. Then when young people come in, you say, no, these are not the right young people who should come in, because they are the sons and daughters of politicians, therefore you want another type. I agree with you. Gradually, we're going to move on to that also. This is a transitional phase when, for the first time, the younger people are coming in. That should be welcomed, and hopefully they will bring in with them younger people not necessarily belonging to any family or caste or class. So India is a country which is in transition, and we've got to see it in some kind of time frame. We don't have as long a time frame as the Chinese, by the way. The Chinese have a very long time frame. This reminds me of a story. Zhou Enlai visited France when de Gaulle was president. And André Malraux, the brilliant intellectual, he was the Minister for Culture. So he was taking Zhou Enlai around, and he asked Zhou Enlai, he said, Mr. General Secretary, what do you think of the French Revolution? So Zhou Enlai thought for a while and said, it's too soon to say. So you've got to look at the thing in some kind of a perspective. If the younger generation is coming, give it at least 10-15 साल ते दियो सरदार जी. मेहरबानी करके फिर देखो की होता. I agree with conclusion. And in insufficient sittings, disruption of housing, insufficient sittings is a good point. We are not sitting enough. Our numbers were, somebody quoted, I think Meghnad quoted, how few, you quoted, how it has gone down. Yes, how many sittings, how much shorter our sittings have become. Now that is not a good sign. Disruption is not a good sign. And nonetheless, and also the 4 C's, as I call it, corruption, criminalization, casteism and communalism. These 4 C's are there, and one has to see how they are to be combated. Now the media has a very significant role to play. The media, the direct telecast was something which I was very worried about, I must say. But everybody seemed to feel that it was a good idea, and so there we are. We can't now go back on that. But, and this is the final point I'll make, the real important work is done in the committees. Today I presided over, for 2.5 hours, I presided over the External Affairs Committee of Parliament. And that is where we were taking evidence from the ministry, from the secretary. They were all there, and they asked searching questions. That is where the executive is grilled by the legislature, by the MPs. That is where the work is actually done. And that is a very important part. There was a terrible suggestion that they should be televised, and we opposed it tooth and nail. The moment you start televising the committee systems, it will become exactly miniature parliaments. As it is in the committees, members do not always reflect what their parties think. There is a genuine individual contribution. I've noticed that. I've been on the External Affairs Committee for many, many years, often presiding over when the chairman is not there. And the committees are extremely useful. And the only thing is, unfortunately, their reports do not get enough time to be discussed in Parliament. You know, we make a report. Now, if that report is simply laid on the table of Parliament, okay, it's there in the public domain. But the real advantage would be if each one of those reports is discussed. Because a lot of work has gone into those reports, a lot of labor, a lot of executive, administrative work has gone into it. So they, I think, are one of the very good features of our Parliament. I agree that we are going through a crisis situation. We are in some kind of a transition mode. Public opinion is asserting itself in unexpected ways. There's a middle class that is growing and becoming more assertive. Younger people now are no longer content to play a subsidiary role. Women are beginning to become much more assertive. As I said, Mr. Hartleb, I don't know whether you know that we had a situation in just 3 or 4 years ago where the President of India was a woman, The Speaker of the Lok Sabha was a woman. The leader of the largest political party was a woman. The Chief Minister of Delhi, the capital, was a woman. The Chief Minister of our largest state, Uttar Pradesh, was a woman. The Chief Minister of West Bengal was a woman. The Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu was a woman. So if you think that the women are not empowered in India, I agree, Angela Merkel is a very powerful thing, but what I don't think you have that many chief ministers in Germany, women, as we have in India. And also, let me tell you, the one issue upon which the Congress and the BJP are agreed is 1/3 reservation for women. It is the other parties, the smaller parties, that have disrupted that have disallowed that. So women are also rising, younger people are rising, the nation is changing. It's a very exciting time. I want to combat the negativism that I find everywhere. क्या होगा जी, ये देश टूट रहा है, रो रो के पिट पिट के काम कर देने. That doesn't help. You've got to take a positive view and say that we are moving into a new situation. We have the power of the Indian civilization behind us, 5,000 years. We have a power of 60 years of parliament behind us. We will overcome. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for giving us a very illuminating address and kindly, and underlining some very important points. Dr. Sharma and both Dr. Mehra referred to the fact that our parliamentary functioning has come to a crossroad. But sir, the matter of concern is not that it's come to a crossroad. The matter of concern which you and Lord Meghnad Desai also pointed out is that it has come to a stage where it is not performing its basic role. What the founding fathers wanted it to do. It is the cornerstone, the words which you've used. But that cornerstone today is no longer, it's neither corner nor stone. It's three basic functions which was supposed to perform. You mentioned about the financial scrutiny of government's executives' revenues and expenditure, which it is not doing. It was supposed to influence policies and important decisions of the executive, which it can't do. It was supposed to hold the executive accountable, which it can't do. Some of the distortions which we see in the functioning of our parliamentary democracy, the parliamentary system, is directly linked to the distortions that have grown in our other pillars of the constitutions. And they cannot be delinked from that. And some of the blame rests, I would say a large part of that blame is with the executive. You mentioned about these disruptions. Now, why do these disruptions take place? Because today, an average member of parliament, we are talking of empowering of women, and the average member of parliament needs to be empowered. He feels that he is no relevance. Whether in making legislations, whether in influencing executive decision. You said, sir, that our representations has increased, that they really truly represent the people of this country. But these representatives have become, I can't think of a better word, have become almost impotent. I'm talking an average member of parliament, and they say so. They say so. And what are they doing? They are demonstrating street politics. Because Dr. Sharma mentioned about telecasting. Telecasting of these proceedings give them an opportunity at least to tell their constituents that we are doing something for you. Otherwise, their voice is not heard. Their voice is not heard. And today the executive has taken the position in more and more situations where it says that you can say what you want because the Constitution says that I must consult you, but I don't have to agree with you. So whatever the opposition, whatever the views which are there, they can completely disregard them and go their own merry way. And that is what is happening. whether it is in appointments of key positions, whether it is in formulating of key policies. There is a total ignore of the other point of view. And that results in these disruption and the distortions which you are seeing today. And it's a great danger that we are facing, because if people's faith in the functioning of the parliament is eroded, notwithstanding your very optimistic forecast, I think this danger should not be minimized.
Credibility is declining, definitely.
It is declining, and people's trust in the parliamentary system is eroding. And as they say in nature, there is no vacuum. And this vacuum can be filled by forces which are anything but democratic. And I think one should be wary of that development. And we use this whip in a way where the decision which is already taken by few people is pushed through without any discussion at all. And important decisions are taken. As somebody said, that when India, small decisions in our system take time and time again. When we make a request to the government, I'm now no longer in the part of the executive, so I can say that it goes on from the lowest to the highest, and it takes months and months before a decision is taken. But when India decides to go to war to any country, the decision is taken like this, because few people sit over a table and decide that's it, that we can do that. I'm a witness to these decisions. So I think there is terrible distortions have set in our system. And our parliamentary system, we must revive it. We must restore its credibility, and this misuse of whip system must stop.
It was also, let me point out, it was anti-defection.
Anti-defection again.
The reason why that schedule was put in was because people were defecting on payment, and therefore to prevent defection, this was put in. So this was the classic example of unexpected consequences.
Every rule, every part of procedure is given for a certain goal. And anti-defection law was very good. Now it is 1/3 have to defect before anything. But what's actually happening? The ruling political party, and I'm not mentioning the opposition, probably is equally to be blamed, has a minister who is defected. And they encourage defection. They openly, blatantly, brazenly encourage defection. Now with this, the anti-defection law has become meaningless. It has totally become meaningless because they give them other incentives. Okay, you resign, we'll look after you. So he resigns from the defection law, and as a MLA or as a member of parliament, he had no position, but now as a non-member, he is given some lucrative public sector posting or something else, and he's looked after. Now these are distortions. I mean, you can make rules, you can make regulations, you can amend the constitution, but when your intentions are not honest, these things will never go far. I think that is where time has come when you should call spade a spade, see what is happening, and find remedies for it. Otherwise, we have taken a downhill road, and as he says, as we go down, we'll gather momentum, and that momentum can be very fast. With these, I am not going to take more time because I know we are a little over time. So now I'll request our final speaker, Mr. Dilinik. He is the third organizer of this particular conference, and he has a very important part to play in organizing this conference. You can understand what I mean. So I now request...
In fact, the German experience of the Weimar Republic and the erosion of democracy and the rise of Hitler is a sort of object lesson of what we must not let happen in India.
Yeah. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Dr. Singh, especially also for this last remark. Thank you, all the panelists. I think our dear friend of the foundation, Dr. Mehra, I can just congratulate also you that the original idea of putting this panel together to kick off the discussion has succeeded very well. We could barely stop you from already now picking so many topics, and I think all of you will take out many questions and arguments out of this, and also hopefully in tomorrow's and day after's discussion. I would very much like to thank you, Dr. Karan Singh, for bringing once again, and it's always a joy to listen to you, so many deep thoughts and open remarks to the discussion. That is very well received, and we are very honored and happy that you have contributed to this discussion here. And I would very much like also to thank Lord Desai of Soli, in spite of the fact that he's not here anymore, but maybe that's a charming anecdote that the Iron Lady Margaret Thatcher one last time came in between one's plans, how she has done so remarkably in the past, and may she rest in peace, but that Lord Desai has taken part here today and giving a very thoughtful and a deep impression from his experience from the British Parliament. As we all know, with all the history the British Parliament and democracy went through, it is very remarkable to hear from that point of view as well. And I'm happy that my dear friend and a friend of the foundation, Dr. Hartleb, has joined as also give a couple of ideas of the discussion and development of democracy in Germany. And Dr. Singh, you mentioned actually the German experience is also speaking as a German living now in India for almost 3 years. We have learned historic lessons, and we've seen that one of the most liberal and open democracies at that time, the Weimar Republic, has failed in a democratic way. And still today, you can claim it was legal how Hitler came to power. And eventually, we learned our lesson in a brutal way that the history has taken the shape, as we all know, in the Second World War, and we had to react on that. And if you look today at the way German history has been written and our constitution has been designed, if you look how we protect the main pillars of our constitution against possible change by democratic vote, even if it would be by absolute majority, one cannot take away the human rights and freedom of the individuality anymore in Germany. And that is something which we have learned very brutally from our own past, and which we try also through the means of our foundation to bring into the discussion worldwide and in Germany itself, because democracy is about learning, and it needs Democrats. And the Democrats have to be especially in the public and between the citizens of one's country. And for that, you need education. You have to need to have understanding for your rights, but also your duties as a citizens. And I think through the picture we have shaped through the Indian, German, and British experience tonight, we have seen that despite the pathways which are so different, and these countries went through, there are many similar challenges at this very moment, with which the parties, the parliaments, and the democratic movements have to cope with. And there's one more aspect which you have very rightly claimed: we have to look for legitimacy also in the eyes of the citizens, because there is a competition of political systems. The democracy is not the only one of the system which claims to lead to a welfare and a good development. And this is something where we once again have to show that this is these are the pillars we believe in, and this is also what makes our countries, the countries we discussed here today, very similar, because we believe in these principles and will not give them up, but we have to work for them. Let me just very briefly conclude with a sincere thank to Professor Mehra, who has been such a good friend of the foundation in the past, and of CPA, which has been an organization we could always openly discuss and develop plans. And I'm very happy that you took us on board for this event. And if you say the organizer, I have to humbly say that my role here has been, compared to the role CPA has put in as an effort in this, very little, and I'm very thankful to you and CPA and the whole network that you have developed this program here. In this regard, I would also very much like to thank you, Dr. Sharma, for hosting us here at the IRC. We all have participated in so many good discussions in this building, and I'm very sure that the next 2 days will again be one more of these events we would look back to and be very satisfied with. In this regard, let me thank the panelists, Mr. Chairman, and especially you, as I feel that you are already looking very much to participate in tomorrow's and day after's discussion. I'm very much looking forward to hear your arguments there, and welcome you to take them over to tomorrow's day. Thank you very much.